Hi, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. We're just going to wait for a few more folks to join before we get started. All right, see people coming into, right, all these participants. All right, well, let's get into it. Ooh, loving all these names I recognize. Good afternoon and welcome to today's Research America's Alliance discussion. I'm Erin Darbuz, and I'd like to thank you for joining today on Zoom and for your partnership in the Research America Alliance. And just starting off with some housekeeping, this Alliance discussion is open to everyone, but if your organization is not a member, I do hope that you will reach out to Donald Cook, our Associate Director of Membership and Development, whose email you can find in the chat, just for more information about our Alliance. And throughout the presentation, please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box or in the chat, and we will get to as many as we can throughout today's session. Today, I'm so excited because our Alliance discussion is in partnership with Fight Colorectal Cancer, Fight CRC, who has a very special place in my heart. And our discussion is on the state of colorectal cancer research. It's an absolute pleasure to introduce our two guest speakers, Molly Roberts, Vice President of Advocacy at Fight Colorectal Cancer, and Dr. Cathy Eng, the David H. Johnson Endowed Chair in Surgical and Medical Oncology and the Director of the Young Adult Cancers Program at the Vanderbilt-Ingram Cancer Center. Dr. Eng is also a board member of Fight Colorectal Cancer. And Molly and Dr. Eng are going to join us today just to take a closer look at what's known, what isn't, about the alarming trends happening right now in colorectal cancer. So this conversation comes at a really critical moment. Not only is it Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month, it's March, but there's new data that dropped this year that shows colorectal cancer is now the leading cause of cancer death among adults under age 50. So we're going to highlight the latest research on early age onset colorectal cancer and have an interactive discussion on the current research and advocacy landscape. So thank you both so much for joining. And Dr. Eng, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me today to speak. I'm just going to provide a really high-level view of kind of where we are, because Molly and I discussed earlier today that we really obviously want to have some discussion and some Q&A with the participants. So just friendly reminder that colorectal cancer is a very common malignancy in the United States. And the new numbers for 2026 are approximately 159,000 individuals will be diagnosed, and approximately 1/3 of patients are still at risk for death, unfortunately. And the median age in the United States is 66 years old. Globally, colorectal cancer, despite the recommendations for screening, continues to be a global issue and remains a very common cancer. As you can see below, these are estimated numbers from over 270 plus different countries regarding the risk of colorectal cancer in 2040. And we're here today because I just told you the average age patient is 66, and this is an example of someone that commonly walks into my clinic, unfortunately. A young woman with no evidence of family history, appears very, very healthy, and just had some non-specific discomfort for a couple months. And then additional diagnostic studies were completed. And as you can see on the left, the patient has multiple lung nodules. And on the, to the right of that, right here, it demonstrates evidence of liver metastasis. So this patient has stage 4 colorectal cancer. And the current recommended screening age is 45. And so this patient has stage 4 disease. And currently, our 5-year survival for a stage 4 patient, if they're not a surgical candidate for a resection, is approximately 16%. And so despite all the new developments in colorectal cancer therapy, we still don't have a significant increase in our 5-year survival. When I started my career, the number is 9%. That's over 20 years ago. We're going in the right direction, but we still need a lot more in regards to therapeutic options for patients. And As you stated, Aaron, it's been estimated now that as of 2023, this was just published in 2026, so I think it's really, really important to keep in mind. So I'm going to talk a little bit just about general colorectal cancer, but just obviously to highlight the alarming concern regarding the rise in early onset colorectal cancer. And it is estimated to be the leading cause of cancer death as of 2023. When we originally started looking at this data, we thought that it would be the leading cause of cancer death. We estimated for 2030, and that was published several years ago in 2015. And unfortunately here, as you can see, colon and rectal carcinomas in red. It is the only one that is increasing in incidence specifically for early onset patients, and it is going to be the leading cause of cancer death. And that is now as of 2023. So it is our current reality, unfortunately. In general, as you can see, early onset represents a smaller percentage of patients. So 16% of our patient population, when we say early onset, it's really described as less than 50. And then you can see the majority of patients are greater than 65. As mentioned earlier, the median age is 66 years of age. And there is a variability in regards to site of disease within the colon. So here on the right, on the upper right-hand corner, is our early onset patient population. And as you can see here, there's a larger percentage of patients with rectal carcinoma, as well as sigmoid colon carcinoma and distal colon. So basically all left-sided tumors of the colon. That's very common in early onset patients. You can see we're doing a good job in regards to screening for our average age onset patients, but our early onset patients, this is a rising incidence. So where are we in regards to therapeutic options for all patients? And I just want to mention this because it's very important to keep in mind. We do have a lot of breakthroughs, but we've also identified a lot of unique subsets of colon cancer. So we know colon cancer is very common, but now we're breaking it down by various mutations that are found in the tumor itself. And you will notice if you look at all these numbers, for the most part, they are very small percentages. And then we have a larger percentage of what's called RAS type, RAS mutations. But it's 45%. And then there are some of those that do not have a RAS mutation, that have a left-sided tumor, which has a better prognosis based upon prior studies that have been conducted. But in general, very small percentage of patients, it's a small subsets, which make treatment a bit challenging in regards to clinical trial development for pharmaceutical companies. So here is just a very high-level overview about some of the most recent drug developments, specifically in those molecular subset patient populations. There's been a lot of this has been pressed, all these new FDA approvals, but I show you here basically the percentage of patients that have these mutations. So Breakwater, in full disclosure, I'm one of the investigators, which is the BRAF V600E mutation. This was a wonderful trial because these patients are known to have very aggressive tumors, but that represents less than 10% of all patients. We also have a lot of interest in immunotherapy. Everybody knows that immunotherapy is the big breakthrough for cancer in general. And then more recently, we found that combined immunotherapy is more beneficial than single agent immunotherapy. But that is also only in our microsatellite instability high patient population, which is in less than 5% of all of our patients. Then earlier on, we also recognized that HER2 amplification, which is very common in breast cancer, and then it was found to be helpful in gastric cancer. It represents a very small percentage in colorectal cancer, 4%. There are ongoing frontline trials at this time. And then more recently, we've also had a KRAS G12C inhibitor that's received approval. This is one of two that received approval in previously treated patients, but that is only 2% of the patient population. So these very rare subsets here, and actually all of these trials required global participation from cancer centers across the world in order to get these trials completed because they are such rare subsets. They could not be conducted in the United States alone. In regards to the general patient population that may not have any of those specific mutations that have a drug tailored to that specific mutation, we've had two um, developments, which basically on the left is Lonsurf. Lonsurf was approved many, many years ago, but we now know it's better in combination with bevacizumab, which is a drug that has been approved since the early 2000s. And then more recently, we have received approval for fruquintinib, which is an oral agent, which basically works on the same family that bevacizumab works against, but is more selective. And this is the most recent drug approved in the non-targeted therapies. But you can see here that basically these are small increases in overall survival for the non-molecular based therapy. There's another drug called regorafenib, which I'm not going to show here because it was approved many, many, many years ago. And it also was approved for improved survival of less than 2 months versus placebo. So this is kind of where we are in regards to drug development. But what about our early onset patients, as you mentioned? Well, I'll show you some evidence because people always wonder, well, can we not create trials specific to them? And I'm sorry. And so basically, as mentioned earlier, early onset patients is rising incidence. It's been rising by 3% per year. And here, this just basically shows you that it's the leading cause of cancer mortality, as noted here on the right. So what is the reason for all this occurring? And all of this is happening because basically, sorry, I'm going to turn something off. I apologize. It's making a lot of noise. Okay. Uh, we do not know the exact etiology to account for early onset colorectal cancer. I'm not going to show you a lot of literature, but a lot has been published about potential reasons to account for early onset in regards to lifestyle. So, being overweight has been associated, tobacco use has been linked, alcohol use has been linked, having metabolic disorders such as diabetes, being more sedentary and a low physical activity has been linked. There's a lot of interest ongoing in the microbiome, as well as antibiotic use and how it impacts the microbiome. And is this potentially the reason to account for early onset? Because the main reason everyone is concerned is because we know early onset is continued to rise by 3% per year. The average age patient is 66. The recommended screening age is 45. And the majority of these patients have sporadic colorectal cancer. I did want to mention that. That's very, very important. This is not an inherited form of colorectal cancer, which is extremely rare. These are mostly sporadic, and we do not have an exact etiology at this time. So that's why there's a lot of ongoing research regarding various the potential impact on lifestyle. What we do know, unfortunately, is that several of these patients are presenting with advanced disease. This is just to give you some general information. This was from a commercial insurance database. This was published in 2023. And this is in the United States, mind you. But obviously, the more symptoms you had, so here in yellow is greater than 3 symptoms, the more likely you were able to be diagnosed following your development of symptoms. However, what you'll notice as a physician is the majority of these patients are now presenting with stage 4 disease, just like that the CT scan I showed you earlier. And then they've gone to multiple doctors. They've gone to 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 different doctors. They thought they had some non-specific abdominal discomfort. They were told, I hear this all the time, they were told it was hemorrhoids. They were told it's irritable bowel. They were told you're too healthy to have colorectal cancer. And as a result, and then because they're too young to be screened, they often present with more advanced disease. And yet, I just told you that our 5-year overall survival for this patient population with surgically unresectable disease is only 16%. One thing we do know is that there is not a specific molecular tumor mutation that is unique to early onset versus average age onset that's been identified that would suggest this is the exact treatment we should provide this patient population, and this is the clinical trial we should provide to the early onset patients. That has not been identified at this time. I show you here three large analyses that have been, 2 have been published, 1 has been submitted, And in full disclosure, I was involved in two of them. And basically, we could not find anything unique specific to our early onset patients versus our average age onset patients. So going back to, I'm so sorry about this. I thought I turned this off. Okay. Going back to the consideration of antibiotic use and microbiome, the reason there's a lot of interest in this is because I just showed this diagram from one of our publications to just demonstrate what can happen. There is some suggestion to say that obesity, high fat diet, this basically impacts your metabolism in regards to your microbiome. And then if you take some antibiotics on top of this all, how does this result in what's called dysbiosis? And does this put you at risk for colorectal cancer as an early onset patient? Now, there's some literature that has been published that is from a group that was published last year from Dr. Diaz-Gay. And it suggested that in early onset patients, because there has been some microbiome work done in general for colorectal cancer, but not a lot specifically to early onset, there was a suggestion that a signature was identified in early onset patients. Now, oops, sorry. I want to just emphasize this did receive a lot of press. I think the data is very, very interesting. However, it needs to be validated. It only involved 132 patients, and it only involved 11 specific countries. It does not involve Australia, UK, and the US, which are known to have high, as well as actually it didn't involve Korea, which are high incidence rates of early onset colorectal cancer. And so this does need to be validated, but it suggests there may be some signature. I've seen some other data that has not been published yet that may say that that may not necessarily be the case in the United States. We've also, there's a lot of interest in exposures and is this accounting for why patients develop early onset colorectal cancer? And this is just a diagram that was taken out of a paper in Science a few years ago just to demonstrate how things have evolved and because why is this happening in early onset patients? And I forgot one very important slide. I apologize. I thought I had added it because I usually always add it. So I show this to you because there is what we call birth cohort analyses, which indicate if you were born after 1990 compared to individuals born before 1960, you have 2 times increased risk for colon cancer as an early onset patient and 4 times increased risk for rectal carcinoma. And that may, once again, be associated with why we're seeing more rectal cancer in the early onset patient population. And so when we're thinking about what has transpired between 1960 and 1990, obviously a lot of new developments, but obviously some of these may not necessarily be very healthy and putting us at risk due to environmental exposures for carcinogens. As a result, there's a lot of interest in what's called the exposome. So looking at, I took this off from Microsoft Pilot just to put in layman's terms. So exposome is basically everything you've been exposed to. It can be in utero, and basically your entire lifespan. And does that put you at increased risk for colorectal cancer? Because one thing that's really important to keep in mind is the average age patient. It is reportedly based upon historic studies that it takes 5 to 10 years for a non-cancerous polyp to become cancerous. And that is why a colonoscopy is so critical. You can get all the additional tests that are non-invasive, but at the end of the day, a colonoscopy is still the gold standard because you can remove those non-cancerous polyps to prevent cancer. And so if I tell you I just saw my 34-year-old patient, well, that would tell you that she probably had a polyp going back as early as her mid-20s to late 20s, and that is why she developed colorectal cancer. So for our early onset patient population, I like to emphasize that it's really important. These patients face very different challenges than our average age onset patients. If you think about lifestyle changes in your 20s and 30s, people are starting families, people have graduated from their first degree or their second degree. They're thinking about having a new career path, etc. And then there's financial implications, as you can guess, because we all have student loans when you graduate from one degree versus another. It's just a lot of additional stressors for an early onset patient. And there's not a lot of thought in regards to thinking about what can we do to support them. And of course, fertility is an issue as well that needs to be discussed. And I don't share this here just in a matter of time, due to the interest of time, but not all states cover fertility preservation for cancer patients. So we created a young adult cancers program here at Vanderbilt. I just want to highlight it real quick. Basically, it's to support all cancer patients. It's not just colorectal cancer, because my colleagues in both, I think, oh, I didn't show the picture, in both stem cell transplant and sarcoma also have early onset patients, and we want to provide additional support to these patients. So on the right, we created a YouTube video to emphasize the new change in screening agent to remind people, and then we do send out a monthly newsletter, and there, we do support local events. We just want people to be aware, to be educated, because right now, I don't know if I can say we can identify the distinct answer as to why this is happening to our early onset patients, but what can we do to support them? What can we do to educate others so they know to go to a healthcare provider if their symptoms remain unresolved for several weeks and months? So basically, in short, we have no unique molecular alterations. As I mentioned to you, because we don't have any unique molecular alterations for early onset, there's no specific trials tailored to early onset patients. As mentioned earlier, majority of these patients present with stage 4 disease. They appear to be healthy. They're often misdiagnosed. There's delay in diagnosis, and we really need to promote education and awareness. And we want to promote collaborations nationally, internationally. Oh, sorry, I did include a picture of my colleague. Sorry. So my co-directors, once again, are Libby Davis, who treats sarcoma, and Baggy Delari, who does a stem cell transplant. And that is our program manager, Hassani Bland. We also try to create a blueprint for those that want to start early onset programs. This is more specifically for colorectal cancer programs. And as you can see here, many very well-known designated cancer centers with our colleagues in Colorectal Cancer Canada, and this was published last year. And my effort as a senior clinical researcher is to mentor others. And so I'm often asked how can we create programs similarly at our institution? And as a result, I created just a small pilot project that's supported by Fight CRC in full disclosure, which is comprised of 10 NCI designated cancer centers and one non-NCI designated cancer center, Penn State. But once again, 11 centers in general, basically focusing on how can we support our early onset patients, and how can we reduce the redundancy across silo research at various institutions and try to have greater impact by working all together and helping our early onset patients. And Fight CRC has this global effort, which Molly can probably elaborate more upon, but I'm also a member of this. I am co-chair one of the research groups with Kevin Monahan, my co-chair, but this is an amazing 2-year commitment to try to identify the etiology to account for early onset colorectal cancer and to provide a consensus opinion about what is known across the world and how can we move forward and hopefully increase collaborative efforts. To set the stage, I think for all patients in general, I just want to emphasize new molecular markers are being identified every day. However, as you just saw, all these molecular markers are small subset patient populations. And so we still need a lot of drugs, even for the non-molecular based therapeutic trials. We need lots of therapeutic options, but we need people to enroll in clinical trials. And for those that may not be aware, we do not do as great of a job in the United States relative to our Asian colleagues as well as our European colleagues. They enroll very well to clinical trials because in their countries, they cannot get access to drugs off protocol. Here, because we have insurance for our patients, some have means of trying to get access or apply for access for drugs to be obtained off protocol. And as a result, not everybody participates in a clinical trial. And then obviously there's a lot of concern about participating in a clinical trial. However, every single drug I just showed you today got FDA approved and other countries approved, EMA and Asian countries as well, so we can move the needle forward. Every single drug has to go through a clinical trial before it can be utilized in the community. At the top, this was a publication. Oh, I forgot to put the year, but I think it was 2023. Um, Basically, only in the United States, only 7% of cancer patients participate in clinical trials, just in general. But when you break it down based upon the likelihood of participating, if you're in an academic institution versus a community institution, academic basically uh, sorry, this is a NCI designated cancer center is in the royal blue, which ironically enough is Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month. So it's about 22%. So I always recommend please go get a second opinion before you start your treatment. It is a lot of patients feel rushed. It really do not feel rushed. Take the time 1 or 2 weeks to go get a second opinion to make sure you're receiving the right care. Because unfortunately, because I'm an academic institution, I am often requested to do a lot of second opinions, and I see that not everybody is obtaining the best care they possibly can. And in full disclosure, obviously, I get to see only colorectal cancer patients and a couple of other GI malignancies. So I'm very, very focused, and that's why my expertise lies. And I understand the community doctors are amazing. They're doing the best they can, but they're trying to become an expert in every single cancer, and that's not humanly possible. They are offering great care. But keep in mind, we often work with our community partners to provide the best care to our patients. So please go get a second opinion. And please consider participating in clinical trials because we cannot move the needle forward. Obviously, I do want to highlight there have been some challenges as of late that everyone is aware of in regards to NIH funding, and are obviously some of the limitations here in the United States. And that is all my contact information, and I think that's a good segue for Molly. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eng. That was really informative and really excited to chat with you about it. And yeah, I will pass it over to Molly unless you want to get into questions. Up to you.
Yeah, we can get right into the questions. That works.
Awesome. So Dr. Eng, since we just saw your presentation, I know you said as far as gaps in science, it's challenging because there's so many molecular subsets, that this is a multifactorial disease. Are there any other gaps in the science or things holding the progress back, like you mentioned, NIH funding, that need to be addressed in order to make progress for all colorectal cancer patients?
So from a clinical research perspective, my biggest hurdle is patients having access to clinical trials and participation in clinical trials. I have some patients that tell me that it's inconvenient to drive to participate in a trial, which I completely understand. And we are doing our best to what's called decentralize the clinical trials. So if the clinical trials are based upon 3 different phases, and the phase 3 trials are those right before FDA approval. They're seeking FDA approval. And usually the control arm is the standard of care. So a lot of clinical trials are now trying to decentralize so you can try to obtain that standard of care closer to home. So at least you can participate in the clinical trial, and that way that will help with enrollment and get the trial completed faster so we can have our data sooner and FDA approval sooner if it's a positive trial. That's my biggest hurdle. But in regards to NIH funding, I'm going to leave this to Molly because we talked about it earlier, and so she's going to touch upon it because that is also extremely critical where we are relative to other malignancies.
Yeah, I think the federal investment in colorectal cancer research specifically is a great challenge. So obviously, Research America has done great work and had a lot of focus on the funding landscape broadly. And for colorectal cancer, one of our key priorities, in addition to NIH, is funding through the Department of Defense Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. So that program has a number of different cancer-specific programs within it, but colorectal cancer is the only program not to have, or the only cancer, not to have its own dedicated research program. So that's been a key priority for Fight Colorectal Cancer for the past several years, is getting that dedicated funding, dedicated research program so that we can invest in the research to not only, find more answers about why more and more young people are being diagnosed with colorectal cancer, but also develop, better interventions and better treatment options. So that's a key part of our work. And I think if we look sort of across the federal landscape, colorectal cancer, unfortunately, just that funding is not keeping up with many other cancers in the space.
Thank you. And how do researchers and advocates alike communicate the urgency to the public and to policymakers without overstating, what the science can tell us right now? That's for both of you.
Do you want me to go or you want to go?
You can jump in. I'll follow up.
I can tell you, I think one of the most amazing things about advocacy is, as you know, the screening age used to be 50. If it wasn't for advocacy groups, we would not have reduced that screening age to 45, to be honest. Because I knew what I was seeing in my clinic, which was this alarming number of referrals of young patients. And I had been concerned for many, many years. But in fairness, because of where I used to work, a lot of people thought it was selection bias. But thank God for advocates. And that's really what has made the approach to changing the screening age pivotal for many. Molly can probably elaborate more.
Yeah, well, I would just say, so Fight CRC just hosted our annual lobby day at the beginning of this month. So we had over 250 advocates from across the country come to Capitol Hill. And I think what we are reminded of every year is that, this is not necessarily something that is just naturally on policymakers' radar. So we continue to have to educate policymakers on their staff on what's happening as it relates to colorectal cancer. And even after, several years of beating the drum around early onset, we still have staff and members who think, oh, I thought colorectal cancer was, your grandparents' disease, not something that's affecting people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And so I think, something that was really helpful this year and has been helpful is to combine, our patients, caregivers, loved ones going to the Hill with our medical professional colleagues and our, researchers, our physicians, our nurses. That's been a really powerful combination. And being able to combine the patient story and that real lived experience and being able to share that directly with policymakers to say, this is what's happening in your state and your district, with the data and what we're seeing, in the literature and in studies. And so kind of being able to have that combination and to Dr. Eng's point, to be able to have someone like her come and say, this is what I'm seeing, day to day in my practice. In addition, I think that's really powerful.
And this next question is for both of you. You're both involved in the early age onset, colorectal cancer think tank, and Dr. Eng, you're working on mentoring initiatives for the next generation of researchers and scientists. And so how are these efforts shaping the future of the field?
I think it just, number one, it improves education and awareness, right? So the more people we can impact with having them acknowledge that this is a problem. Yes, it's a smaller minority of the overall patient population, but this is a huge problem when you're seeing 20 and 30-year-olds in your clinic with stage 4 disease that have incurable disease, right? And so it makes a huge difference because it impacts education awareness and it inspires them to do research. So you don't have to be in a lab necessarily to be, that's not the only way to identify what is occurring with early onset colorectal cancer, right? There's many ways to go about it. And I think the more people that are engaged in early onset research, the more likely we are going to obviously identify an etiology sooner rather than later. So that's from my perspective, and it really helps with education and awareness. I think that's the most critical component because these are people that they can identify with. Because I remember when I was younger and I was seeing somebody my age in my clinic, and it's shocking. My youngest patient was 16. My youngest patient is still 16. I had one just last year.
Oh my gosh.
I would just add to that as a non-scientist perspective on kind of the think tank and that work. We hosted a global think tank last June in Barcelona, bringing together, researchers from, I think it was, 30 different countries. And it was just really heartening to see the collaboration and how people wanted to work together. And I think what we kind of our philosophy as an organization, and particularly in light of the fact that funding is limited, for research for this disease, is how can we, collaborate certainly within the US, but also globally to make sure that we're investing in sort of the best science, the best opportunities, and, building on the, research and expertise of people across the world to help accelerate advancements more quickly. So it's been really exciting to see, and just how open people are to that type of collaboration.
And speaking of collaboration and that, you don't need to be a scientist in order to help with this work, Fight Colorectal Cancer has a really unique and interesting program, the Research Advocacy Training and Support Program. Molly, can you speak to that and what that is and how it's informing colorectal cancer research?
Yeah, happy to. So, our Research Advocates program, we affectionately call them our RATs, Research Advocacy Training and Support Program.
They love it. They love
They
being
love
called
it.
rats.
Yeah, yeah, they like it.
I can tell you, I
But
don't forget it.
yeah, people don't forget it, that's for sure. But this is a program that really helps our research advocates gain a comprehensive understanding of the colorectal cancer research continuum. And so most of them are either patients themselves or caregivers. And so it helps them to engage in the research process, both with their perspective, but also with kind of a broader patient caregiver perspective. So we equip them with the tools through a really comprehensive training process. We do webinars and in-person engagement to help prepare them to sit on review panels, to provide feedback on clinical trial protocols, on patient-facing materials, so that they can really help inform the research process of what might be meaningful to a researcher, or what they might see value in may not match exactly what a patient or a loved one would see value in, or maybe there's language that doesn't resonate with a patient, or is, confusing, or maybe turns them off from wanting to participate. And so our research advocates are able to engage in that process and in that way help to move the research forward. So it's been a really exciting program to watch it grow and evolve over the years. And we have a group of really, really passionate research advocates that, dig into the work in a really impressive and exciting way.
That's so exciting to hear about, and how patients can really be involved in informing the work that's happening is so important. Oftentimes they do get left out. And Molly, Fight Colorectal Cancer, you said you had your annual Hill Day. You all are doing so much advocacy wise. Can you talk about, some of the advocacy programs and initiatives that you all have going on at the federal and the state level?
Yeah. So, as I said, we just had our annual lobby day. So that was called Call on Congress. So we host that every year in March. And again, bring advocates from across the country to Washington, D.C. Again, run them through a really robust training program to help prepare them for going to the Hill, meeting with their member of Congress, how to share their story, how to connect it to policy. And we had a really, really fantastic showing this year with really great feedback from our meetings on the Hill. So we, as I mentioned before, our main kind of advocacy priority for our Hill Day was the creation of a colorectal cancer research program within the DoD. So we've made some really great progress there. We had 71 members of the U.S. House of Representatives sign on to a letter in support of that program. We're working on building that, mirroring that support in the Senate. So I'll put, we've got an action alert. So if you want to reach out to your senators, either via email or phone call to encourage them to support this program, I'll put a link in the chat around that. But we're really focused on, maintaining that year-round advocacy. So obviously coming to DC and meeting with members of Congress is incredibly important, but it's critical that we continue that drumbeat year-round, that we continue to build relationships with members of Congress and their staff. We continue to remind them, how important it is to focus on the colorectal cancer community and invest in research. So we also have a platform called Community of Champions, which is a really great kind of gathering spot for all of our advocacy programs and resources. So this is a great way that you can not only get connected to opportunities to advocate and opportunities to get involved, but also can connect with other advocates in your state and region. So we have regional groups where you can get to know people from, for example, if you live in Florida, you can get to know other advocates from Florida, see what they're doing, collaborate, work together. We do a state proclamation campaign every year, encouraging people to have their governors or local officials declare March as Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month. And Florida comes to mind because our Florida group has been particularly successful in that they've worked together to get their, local county officials and mayors and state reps to engage on it. So there's lots of great opportunities within Community of Champions to continue to get involved. So happy to share that link as well. But I think the biggest thing that we really want to emphasize is just that continued engagement. And there's a lot of different ways that you can be engaged. And if you can't make it to DC, that's okay. You can still work to build those relationships with your member of Congress at home and continue to push the effort forward.
Wow, that's a lot going on. And yeah, shout out to Florida. I think we lost Dr. Eng. She's probably coming back. But in the meantime, is there anything that you wish that people knew about, maybe clearing up any misconceptions about colorectal cancer that, maybe in people's minds in the public that you would want them to know or walk away from this meeting having a new understanding about?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of for the general public, I think as as it relates to policymakers, since that's sort of my lens, it really is just emphasizing that this is not just your grandparents' disease, and this is something that is impacting young people. I think sometimes there's also maybe a misunderstanding or belief that if you hear a story of a young person getting colorectal cancer, that's an anomaly, and unfortunately that's not the case anymore. And so I think continuing to have that conversation to show that this is something that's happening, to raise awareness about the signs and symptoms, to talk to your family about family history. I think those things are critically important. And I think people are getting more and more comfortable talking about colorectal cancer, but maybe compared to other cancers, there's perhaps more stigma around the disease. I think we're working to really break down those barriers. But the more that we can talk about it, the more we can not be embarrassed to talk about our bowel movements, to talk about what's happening. I think the better, and kind of bringing that to light and hopefully being able to get to people who are experiencing symptoms sooner, so that they don't, as Dr. Eng mentioned, kind of fall into that category of being diagnosed much later when the disease is more difficult to treat.
Yeah, I definitely try and use the word rectal a lot because I feel like people do shy away from it. And we had a lot of questions in the chat and pre-submitted questions about participating in colorectal cancer research and how one can do that, can get in a study, whether it's specifically for Dr. Eng or others. Do you all have any advice on how patients can get involved in studies and clinical trials? Oh, Dr. Eng lost power. We can come back to that. Let me check through the chat for other questions. we can make these slides available. There is a shout out from Francine Walton to Dr. Eng. They work together at MD Anderson, so she's saying hi. And yeah, folks want to participate in advocacy. Andrea's asking, how can she participate? So what's the best way for advocates? I know you said yours Community of Champions. Fight Colorectal Cancer has lots of programs. What advice would you give?
Yeah, I was trying to find a link, but I just put into the chat our action alert around the DoD ask. So that's a great way to get started. I'd also encourage you to sign up to be an advocate with us. So that'll just make sure that you are added to, all of our emails and newsletters. It'll prompt you to be able to join Community of Champions, which again, I think is a really great resource and space to get connected to everything that's happening. We host monthly advocacy action hours, so monthly kind of interactive webinars where we'll go over different topics, sort of the latest opportunities, maybe bring in speakers, do a deep dive on a particular topic, and also have time again for advocates to connect with one another. I think that's always a really powerful part of Call on Congress, and our advocacy event is, how we are able to work together as a team and, amplify each other's efforts. I think also thinking about, what is, relevant to you and your community. And, maybe you're a part of a, biking club, or maybe you're you work at a large employer in your community. Advocacy can happen at all of those different levels. So maybe it's reaching out to your HR to see what your benefits package looks like. Does your company support you taking the time to get screened? Or are you, able to talk to your biking group about the importance of getting screened when you turn 45 if, you're at average risk. So I think the more that we can continue to get that awareness and education out into the community, and then, of course, obviously, building those relationships with policymakers so that they understand what's at stake and the urgency behind this is incredibly important. And so they need to hear from us and continue to hear from us.
That's great. Thank you. And Dr. Eng, I see you answered Sonia's question in the chat about, her sister was told by her physician to get a Cologuard test at 48 years old, citing, that the less invasive is better than a colonoscopy. And I know you said in your presentation, the colonoscopy is the gold standard. It's the only way to remove precancerous polyps. And that, that's misinformation, that one screening, that screening is better than a colonoscopy. But I know at Fight CRC, we always said the best screening is the one that you'll do, right? So we want patients to get screened, but colonoscopy is always that gold standard because it can actually remove precancerous polyps.
I would just add to that too, is that, Cologuard and other non-invasive options are great tools, but also if you get an abnormal result on a Cologuard test, a FIT test, you have to get a colonoscopy in order to confirm a diagnosis. So, if you if you don't get an abnormal result, you can go another either 1 to 3 years, depending on the interval in that particular test. But colonoscopy is likely a part of the process, regardless of where you start. So I think it's also weighing, if you want to kind of take multiple steps or just one. So.
And we had some pre-submitted questions and a question in the Q&A chat asking if there's any outcome disparities among EO-CRC patients of different ethnicities, and what is the state of research on this topic?
That's a great question, but there is a lot of, there's a rising incidence in the Hispanic patient population, as well as our American Indian patient population. That is well documented, and I think part of that is due to access, and then also part of it is due to failure of getting screened when they're having symptoms, because, as we all know, any screening is better than no screening, but a colonoscopy takes time. You have to take time off from work. You have to find transportation. You have to coordinate your days to make sure it's done correctly, because if you don't do your prep right, then you have to repeat your colonoscopy, right? And so there's definitely a lot of issues in regards to our increased incidence with the Hispanic American Indian patient population. There is definitely ongoing research. I would also say globally, there's also, I gave a lecture recently in Seoul, and I found it had the highest incidence in Asia as well, which was surprising for early onset. So this is a global issue, and there are definitely disparities.
Okay, thank you. Another question in the Q&A is from Zakila, and she's a mother of four and has Lynch syndrome. Do you know if there's any resources and support for genetic testing for her children that are under 18, and if there's a specific language that providers should use so insurance companies can cover it, because she's been denied several times because of their age? And then secondly, is if there's a complete list for those that do have genetic mutations or hereditary conditions to use as a guideline for care and preventative screenings, as she has to get colonoscopies, upper endoscopies, and pap smears.
So for underage children, so that is number one. Most people don't normally probably start screening for, even though they have a known history of Lynch, until they're 18, just because they are not adults yet. And genetic counselors can assist with that. But usually the primary care physicians, as long as they document correctly, the children should be able to be referred as soon as they turn of age. Now, there are some cases where they may feel that they have concerns. Maybe they're having symptoms, and they can be seen by their pediatrician, who can also do the same documentation in the referral process. And there is definitely language that could assist with getting insurance approval. I think it's just a matter of taking the time and documenting it, and the patient's whole history. So every new patient I see, I actually take a very full family history, and not necessarily, it's challenging being a physician nowadays. They are allotted a very limited time for new patients and follow-up patients. And so it's really a matter of taking the time and effort for the patient to communicate well to the physician, as well as give them updates, but as well as the physician to take the time to place all that information into their chart, especially in the electronic medical records, so it stays in there for all of the providers. So.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that, as I'm a high risk individual. And I actually was referred to my first colonoscopy in my 20s by my gynecologist because they took the time to look at my family history. And that same gynecologist got me genetic testing just because both of my parents had colorectal cancer. So to make sure there wasn't anything, mutations or hereditary syndromes going on. So it was interesting. It didn't come from my primary care doctor. And another question in the chat for Molly. Tori is looking at the research advocacy training program, and applications are closed. Do we know when those will reopen?
I just chatted my colleague who runs the RATS program, so hopefully she'll respond to me before the end of this. But if not, I know there's a form on there to express your interest, and so you'll be updated when applications go live. But I'll try to get an answer for you in the next few minutes.
Thank you so much. Andrea's husband experienced several months wait after suspicion with anemia to the time of colonoscopy. Is there a recommended wait time?
There's no specified wait time, right? Everybody will present with different symptoms. But I mean, the fact that he, had anemia of unknown etiology, that is not normal. And so I personally believe that anything that doesn't resolve after a matter of 2 to 4 weeks, it needs to be investigated with the healthcare provider.
Thank you. And since we're getting close to time, I just want to ask you both one last question. And what is the thing right now that gives you the most hope in the colorectal cancer space?
Oh, for me, I'm very excited about all the potential new therapeutic trials that are in development. So my other role is strategic relations and research partnerships for the Cancer Center. So I work with a lot of pharmaceutical companies, and I get to see all these exciting new drugs that are in development, and I'm excited about those possibilities. But I think creating new therapeutic options for patients is very exciting for me because I want to be able to get that bar past the 16-year, 5-year overall survival for my patients.
Um, and I would say for me, it is the community itself. So our advocate community, the patients, caregivers, loved ones, our, research and medical professional colleagues, the passion and determination and strength of this community is really, really incredible. And I think obviously just, we're at the tail end of Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month, and having attended, a couple of different events this month with the community, I think it's never ceases to amaze me how people continue to show up and continue to advocate and to build community. And I think at a time of challenge in our political environment, which is probably a huge understatement, but we are seeing the needle move, and we are seeing more people starting to pay attention. And so I think, when I went into our, advocacy event this year, I was, unsure of what it was going to look like, and how people were going to respond to us on the Hill, and the way that people responded and have stepped up, I think is really encouraging to me and to the community. So, and that I would, fully credit to the advocates that show up and reach out and share their story and do all of those things. So that definitely gives me hope.
The advocates are definitely inspiring, and hearing their stories. It brings a lot of meaning to what we do as physicians in our everyday lives.
Well, and thank you both for all that you do, the research, the advocacy, engaging patients and their loved ones. And I really want to end on this high note of hope. And I want to thank the audience for your thoughts and participation. Thank you, Molly. Thank you, Dr. Eng, for making the time to talk to us, to share all of this information. It sounds like Fight CRC is going to have some new rats and advocates at Call on Congress next year. It sounds like, Dr. Eng, you might have some applications for more folks to participate in your research. And before everyone leaves, I would like to inform you about our next Alliance discussion. It will be on Wednesday, April 1st at 12 p.m. Eastern, and it will be on the future of biotech in the United States. The registration link is in the chat, and we're going to have a close look at the U.S. biotechnology sector featuring expert guest Dr. Garrett Dunlap, Associate Director of Policy and International Engagement at the Engineering Biology Research Consortium. That was a mouthful. And Dr. Kelly Seagraves, Vice President for National Security and International Affairs at the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. So during that discussion, we'll explore the sector's current role and future prospects as a key part of the U.S. discovery, development, and delivery ecosystem. As always, there will be plenty of time for audience Q&A. And thanks again to our wonderful speakers. Thank you to the audience and everyone. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon and rest of your week.
Thank you so much. And I do want to emphasize, if people can come to Call on Congress next year, I would highly encourage them to do so, because that's an incredible opportunity to meet your congressman and to emphasize to them the importance of cancer research.
Absolutely.
No.
Yeah, Sir Carrie, keep the fight always.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.